This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Get charged up for action that'll shock your system.
Tell me that's not cool.
An unstoppable superhero and his crew embark on impossible missions and will bring mutated villains to justice.
When Static's in the house, bad guys better step off.
Pull the plug on crime with the adventures of Static Shock. Yeah!
Welcome, everyone, to episode 318 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our social media, Liam. We are continuing here with a month of Static Shock reviews here in the scorching hot month of summer, July, at least at the time of original recording. And things are getting hot in Dakota as we have a couple of returning characters to the program. The sun's out. We have the final episode of the original Static run to cover today. It's a momentous occasion today as we kick off episode 318 of the pod.
That's right. We're saying farewell to White Shirt Static, as we talked about last week. Yeah, this is. As mentioned, this is the second of two episodes that debuted during the third season, but had actually been produced much earlier in the show's run back in the second season. But for, I don't think there's ever been an official reason given. Given the animation in this episode, we might have a lead on that. But yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later. But yes, this is an old style, the old art style with the different outfit for Static and pre-Gear Richie, even though this takes place technically in the third season of the show. So here we are today with Trouble Squared, a lot of returning early Static nemesis in this episode with Specs and Trapper, as well as the nefarious Edwin Alva.
You know, you said we're bidding farewell to the White Shirt Static and this original art style, and boy howdy, is it one to go out on. Can't wait to talk about it today with you. But before we do, of course, Liam, we're going to get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which originally debuted here on the Kids WB back on April the 26th, 2003, meaning we have passed the 21-year anniversary of this episode's debut. And of course, the official IMDb synopsis is brought to you by the Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/the Pod Tower today and subscribe. Not only can you get our entire podcast catalog available for streaming on YouTube, but you also get some great content from the folks at Watchtower Database and their ongoing Jump on the Bat-Wagon podcast, as well as their Intergang interview series, as well as the entire Tim Talk podcast library, all in one convenient streaming area for your listening pleasure. That's youtube.com/the Pod Tower. Head over today and subscribe.
All right, yes. So this is the synopsis for Trouble Squared, which is written by Christopher Simmons, directed by Dave Kleistic. Apologies if I'm butchering that. Music by Richard Wolf, and animation by Slightly Offbeat Productions and Top Draw Animation. That's right, two studios joined together.
I think you'll be able to tell that once we get to talking about animation too.
Explains some of it. But yes. With all that said, that synopsis reads as such. After a field trip to Alva Industries, Virgil runs into Mr. Specs and Trapper. Why does only Specs get Mr.? Their eagerness to please Alva causes them to create suits that give them powers. When they capture Static, they inadvertently ruin Alva's project and he fires them. Dead set on revenge, they kidnap Alva Jr. and hold him for ransom. With a price, Static helps Alva get his son back.
And why they might as well have just done the entire.
I don't even know if we need to recap it because that is.
My goodness.
There's minor things we can add, like we open with Virgil in the community center where his dad works, and the old community center's having some money troubles. Their funding hasn't come through. and Pops is a little worried about how he's going to pay the bills. That's our only other really through plot to this episode, besides what they just mentioned.
Hey, Pops.
But the center was counting on that grant. I know times are tight, but so is our budget. I understand. Goodbye. What's going on, son?
I'm leaving for career day, Pops.
Have a good time.
About that call, you okay?
Don't worry about that. The center will pull through. We always do.
You sure? Because if the center needs a loan, the line forms behind me.
Yeah, pretty much. But nonetheless, we will digress into our own more proper, perhaps fill in the blanks a little bit, and let you hear a couple of clips from the program as we go through here. But yes, as you mentioned, kicking things off at the Freeman Community Center, Pops sweating bullets as we hear him on a phone call as Virgil interrupts. And we hear that his funding has indeed been delayed, perhaps denied even, and Static, or Virgil, is somewhat concerned for his dad, but mentions that he has a field trip that day, career field trip, and they're headed to Alva Industries, although he wasn't aware until they arrived that they were going to Alva Industries. So he's there with Richie and Daisy, and as they're doing the tour, they run into the aforementioned Specs and Trapper, who, of course, recognize Virgil from the previous episode, The New Kid, that we reviewed on the podcast. You can check that one out if you want to hear the first appearances of these two gentlemen, Specs and Trapper. But essentially, they remind Virgil that they're aware of who he is. There's a little bit of exposition that happens that explains the backstory of who they are.
Wow. Alva may be a world-class jerk, but man, check out this hardware.
It is impressive.
True, but how much you want to bet there are more cons than pros in this place? I rest my case.
Look who we have here, Mr. Trapper. It's that grunt from the Vanmore School.
So it is. Vermin, right?
Virgil.
Potato.
Hey, it's that other Vanmore reject.
We dumped your school after you losers tried to use us to catch Static, a test that you flunked. Remember?
Ancient history, little girl. Mr. Trapper and I have moved up to the big leagues.
That's right. We were personally selected by the Big A himself to work on a top-secret hush-hush project.
Specs, Trapper, Mr. Alva needs to see you.
See? He doesn't make a move without us.
Now!
Wild guess, they're not in charge. What's wrong, V?
The last time Specs and Trapper worked on a hush-hush project, Static ended up with a bullseye on his back.
And that's where they find out exactly what they're up to, and we see that Mr. Alva is working on getting his son, Edwin Jr., unfrozen. If you recall from his last appearance, the episode towards the end, he unfortunately turned himself to stone. So Edwin Alva Sr. has been looking for some sort of ability to transform him back into human form all this time, and it appears that they're working on some sort of machine that at least has the capability to potentially do so. We see them snap off a piece of his hair, and they're able to transform it back into his human form. So it sounds like they're almost there. The scientists mentioned to Alva that they have to run a few more tests. Of course they do. You can't just use it on a real person. You have to do more tests before they're ready to do that. And that's when, as Alva is leaving, that's when Specs and Trapper interrupt him, and it's made very clear at this point that he barely knows who they are and has hired them to do very little important things as a part of this project, and they're a little bit upset about that. They say that they have their own project that they're working on, and that he should be checking it out. He tells them that they're directing all resources to Edwin's Junior's restoration, and that they should be focused solely on that, and they don't care. He doesn't care if it's busy work for them, that they need to comply, as he's hired them to do that role. So we see immediately that they're not too happy about that. Static, by the way, was eavesdropping on this entire conversation. He had broken into the lab, assuming that they were up to something after seeing Specs and Trapper on that career day field trip. So he's there and has seen and heard everything. So he knows exactly what Alva's up to, as well as Specs and Trapper. And then we see that they're working. We cut to a scene where they're actually revealed as to what this special project is, as they continue amongst themselves to complain about Alva's lack of care for what they're doing. And we see that Specs has created this special helmet that has given him certain unknown powers as of yet, and Trapper has a pair of gauntlets that he's also working on that appear to also have some sort of power behind them. And we see that at this point that the Specs and Trapper are determined to take it to Static at this point, to perhaps prove to Alva that they're worth their weight, and that he should be more interested in their project instead of restoring his son. And the best way to do that is to trap Static and bring him back to the lab for Alva to see.
That's right. So we get a big battle. We reveal what exactly these special Power Ranger suits that Specs and Trapper have built for themselves do. Spec renames himself Spectrum, and he can his visor, his helmet lets him shoot out different color laser beams that have different abilities. He's got like a blue ice beam, a red beam that I guess is fire, a green beam which is green.
I was gonna say I thought it was like the elements at first, but it's not, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. He says Spectrum, and I have all the colors of the rainbow. He does freeze something, which yes would make you think that it's, they're going to be elementally based somehow, but not really. Other than the blue one is ice. But anyway, so he's firing things off, knocks Static back into the jumbotron of the baseball stadium where they're having this little tete-a-tete. And then quickly we find out with the other member, Mr. Trapper, now going by Speed Trap, he has gauntlets that are magic. He's got a speed gauntlet that makes you go, that just you shoot it and the person goes fast, and then a time machine he can slow you, a slowing gauntlet.
Mm-hmm.
And he alternates them at one point and shoots both of them at Static at one point, and that messes with Static's equilibrium, I guess. I don't know. He shakes very violently and then falls over. But altogether, they are able to in fact capture Static after a bit of a scuffle and take him back to Alva Industries, where they are just about to begin this procedure that's going to apparently save and heal Alva's son. And they quickly go and get Edwin Alva as he's on his way to the demonstration, pull him into this lab where they have Static tied up.
Static? You okay? Come in, Static.
Who's that?
Speed Trap. Hold that pose.
If you're wasting my time...
Believe me, Mr. Alva, you will be amazed with what we've done.
Static.
He woke up, but I have the situation contained, sir.
We captured him for you, Mr. Alva.
You what?
Yeah, you always wanted him, right?
We finally figured out a way to overpower him.
You dolts, you imbeciles. In 1 hour, they begin my son's restoration, and you lay this on me?
We have a slight problem.
Better upgrade your flunkies, Alva.
He's getting away!
We'll get him, sir.
Wait!
Trapper has the magic slow time gauntlet on Static, but that doesn't stop. It just slows him. It doesn't freeze him, and so Static very matter-of-factly and slowly is able to zap him just as Edwin Alva and Specs come back into the room, break out of his cell, and after a little bit more of a scuffle, Static not only escapes, but he also there's also a lot of damage done to the facility, which of course will in turn delay the procedure that would have saved Edwin Alva's son. So we cut to the next day where Specs and Trapper are walking, complaining that Edwin Alva only cared about his son once he was turned to stone, never paid him any attention when he was around before. That they're more like sons to him than Edwin Jr. was. I don't know about that, but it's a funny line at least. And as they're complaining, they walk up to their apartments. And I guess it turns out Edwin Alva was paying for that too, as he's kicked them out. He's evicted them, and they have no way of retrieving any of their belongings. So they decide they're going to get even, and they are able to get their super suits back, and they take Edwin Jr. still in his stone form with him. They decide they're going to hold Alva hostage. Meanwhile, Virgil is, at least for the moment, seemingly gonna just wash his hands of it. Says this is between those guys. I'm not going to get involved anymore. And so Alva sends his security team to a warehouse to go try and grab Specs and Trapper and save his son. But it's a trap, in the words of Admiral Akbar. I feel like we've been saying that a lot lately. There's a big robot. They built a big robot too. They have super suits and they built a big robot. Mm-hmm. So that the big robot quickly takes care of all of Edwin's security guys. This is more of a visual note, but I love their like speed stick laser wands that they have. Not quite Barda's Mega Rod, but in that family. But yes, the robot is quickly dispatching Edwin Alva's team. It turns out it was a decoy to I guess trap Alva. But thankfully, Static just happened to be in the area, and I guess overheard the commotion at the warehouse, disarms the robot, and as he goes to leave, but Alva makes a plea to him, please go save his son. There's no time, and they're asking for so much money that he isn't able to simply pay any ransom that they're asking for, because they're asking for too much money. And so he is left with begging Static for help. And reluctantly, Static decides to go ahead and let his conscience lead him to the right decision, which is he's going to go try and save Mr. Alva's boy as we arrive towards our bombastic finale.
Alva, we keep bumping heads like this, we're going to need helmets.
They're not here. This whole thing was a smokescreen.
What are you talking about?
Specs and Trapper. They sent me an email. I had it traced to this location. They kidnapped my son.
They've had practice.
I never told them to go after you. They acted on their own. I swear I had nothing to do with it.
Sure you didn't, Pinocchio.
Those twisted little cretins. They want me to transfer funds. An impossible amount.
What's the matter? Not enough in petty cash money bags?
I only have an hour left. You've got to help me.
I don't have to do anything.
I'll pay you. Name your price.
I'm not for sale.
You know what Specs and Trapper are capable of. They'll turn my boy into rubble. Please.
Yeah, so Static heads back to a familiar site, the Vanmore Institute. That's where the school where Trapper and Specs worked, I believe, in the first episode. So that's where Richie suggests that Static check out. And before, what do you know? First time's the charm. It is indeed where Specs and Trapper are hanging out. So we get a little bit of a security system versus Static battle as he takes down the security system. However, in the midst of the break-in, of course, he comes upon Spectrum and Speed Trap, where they are both doing battle. Speed Trap is able to initially get the best of him, but unfortunately for them, they are quickly overtaken. Static is able to escape, and he finds a room where Alva Jr. is the frozen body of Alva Jr. is standing there. That's when he spots a mysterious package thing with a timer on it. It's a bomb. So he now realizes that the plan is to blow the entire place up with Alva Jr.'s corpse inside of it, I assume. But unfortunately, for Static, as he's putting all these together, that's when Spectrum surprises him from behind and is able to freeze him, as Liam mentioned, one of the aforementioned nondescript magic powers that Spectrum has is freezing people. So he freezes Static in place, and as he and Speed Trap begin discussing what's going to happen, they're waiting for Alva Sr. to send them the money. He, of course, as we already mentioned, already established he was not going to be able to do that. The time limit expires, and this causes them to go ahead with their plan, which is going to now blow up Static.
Nice shot, Mr. Spectral.
Now we have 2 frozen freaks.
Hey, isn't Alva's time almost up?
Actually, he's got 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1.
Maybe Alva's just a little late.
He's never late with anything. Obviously, he doesn't care about his brat. And if he doesn't care, neither do I. I think it's time we leave, Mr. Speed Trap.
The Ice Age is over.
I'm getting tired of this little game.
That makes 2 of us. 10 seconds. Man, these guys are not playing. Yes!
By this time, Static is able to break free of his frozen state, however, and is able to overtake Speed Trap and is able to use his gauntlet to slow down the bomb, as there was only 20 seconds left initially, and now less than 5 seconds remain. So he turns on the gauntlet, slows down the bomb with it, and then advises him to keep the gauntlet on there if he knows what's best for him. Meanwhile, he sneaks out with Alva Jr. and is able to get them outside before returning back inside to save Spectrum and Speed Trap. The bomb does detonate, however, because the gauntlet is on it, I guess it slows the explosion down a little bit, enough for Static to get both Trapper and Specs outside. They are then, of course, remanded to the law at that point, and we see that as a result of Static's ability to save Alva Jr.'s son, we see that a generous donation of $10 million has been made from Alva to the Freeman Community Center. So all's well that ends well, I suppose, in this case. And Pops is sitting on the couch saying that Alva is the best thing to happen to this city since, and he struggles to come up with something to compare it to. And Richie and Static jump in with Static, am I right? And that's they high five, and we end our episode for this week. All right, Liam, let's chat plot here. I'm going to do my best to try and separate. We'll have a lot to talk about, and in my estimation, for me at least, pretty negatively about our next category. So I'm trying my best to separate that from the plot here. I think looking at the plot is okay. Like I like the idea of bringing back these 2 guys who are essentially like they're like the equivalent. We may have made this comparison the last time, so forgive me if I'm stealing your comparison because it feels like something you would do. But the way that they converse with each other is very much like the 2 groundhogs from the old Looney Tunes episode, where they call each other by their name, Mr. Specs, Mr. Trapper, and then of course it's changed to Mr. Spectrum and Mr. Speed Trap later on, and they just kind of are verbally discussing the steps that they're clearly going to take next. So they announce what they're going to do. So I think that, and some of it has to do with the voice actors that they chose, that I enjoy it. Probably if it were 2 different actors, I might not enjoy it as much, but I like them as interesting characters. I think it's funny that their delusions of grandeur in this, instead of just focusing on using, like, they're so desperate for approval from Alva Senior that it's essentially their undoing. Because if they had just quietly made these robot suits on their own and not bothered to try and get his approval or his interest, that, like, they could have just taken down Static on their own, or, you know, used them to rob banks or whatever they needed to do or wanted to do. But there's like this deep-seated need for acceptance and approval that leads them to ultimately waste this potential weapon that they have on their hands, and ultimately turn against the person that they're looking for approval from, and ultimately it turns on them. So I think that's kind of interesting, and certainly an interesting twist to the typical supervillain that just is doing things because they're evil. Like, this seems like they're desperate for that recognition and that acknowledgement that they're really smart, and which has been their motivation. So yeah, so I kind of like that. I don't love the idea that these powers these suits are just kind of like magic and can do whatever they want. I wish there was a little bit more functionality and maybe limitations to them that made sense. It just seems like they're flying suits that can shoot magic on both of them, and they both immediately know how to use them, and they're really good at it. And the only thing they can think to do is try and kill Static with them, I guess, or kidnap Static. So yeah, I think it's fine. I think throwing in the little things of like Static's dad needing money, and he, at the end of the day, like, the bad guy is the guy that gives Static's dad the money. I think there's probably some interesting moral implications there, as to whether or not that's, if the money was gotten by ill-gotten gain and you give it to somebody who's using it for good, does that eliminate the ill-gotten gains? I don't know. Does that redeem it in that form or function? I guess that's an interesting question, but I don't know. It's kind of interesting, I guess, that Static makes his bitter enemy ultimately help his dad out of a jam. I don't know. All that to say, I ended up with a 5 out of 10 for Blot. I think it's okay. I think there's probably a lot of holes here if you look at it. Why the initial Alva attack, like why he sent his guys in, and what their purpose of having a trap, where did they get the giant robot, all that stuff doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you think about it too hard. But yeah, so 5 out of 10 for me. What about you?
Yeah, I gave it the same. The basic bones of it are I think interesting. We haven't really seen, obviously we don't review the Statics in exact episode order, although again, even if we had, this wouldn't matter because this is sandwiched in between 2 regular season 3 episodes. So we haven't seen Alva in a long time, and when we last saw him, he was less overtly villainous because now his son had this condition where he turned to stone, and so he's sort of solely focused now, I guess, on trying to reverse that. So that's kind of interesting. So he's less sinister than he was in his previous encounters with Static, because now he only seems to care about his son, as opposed to, which I guess is kind of the whole thing with Specs and Trapper. They're like, he used to really like to do that supervillain stuff, and now he just makes us like try to help his son. So I kind of like that as like Specs and Trapper, as like, they don't really play it this way. Maybe more in the first episode they did, where they were at the school. Like, they're kind of like the anti Virgil and Richie. Like, they're these smart kids who have these gifts, but are trying to use them solely for like personal profit and or petty revenge, as opposed to Virgil and Richie, who are, trying to help people and save the day. So like, there's kind of something interesting there of them being like a mirror image to Virgil, I think, but they don't really play with that in this episode. It's just they're lackeys who are tired of being lackeys, and they try to strike out on their own and screw everything up, and then take revenge on the boss for firing them. So I mean, it's all pretty standard supervillain stuff, but yeah, it doesn't it's not the most compelling thing. And the side of like, Virgil's dad being really stressed by the community center thing, like that, I feel like could have been a bigger part of the episode. Maybe you eliminate the robot warehouse fight, because it would be interesting to see more of like what the community center means to the Hawkins family, what it means to Virgil and Sharon and Robert, and what it meant when their mom was still alive. Like I felt like it was an episode where you could have delved more into what this means as like a representation for their family and for all the hard work that their father has put in over all these years. And as it stands, it's like, well, we get that one scene at the beginning and we get that one scene at the end, and there's like one little scene in the middle where when they set off the fireworks to attract static to the baseball stadium, Virgil and Rishi are playing basketball, and he mentioned something about like, oh man, I love this place. I've been coming here since as long as I can remember. But you don't really get the sense that this is like it's being treated with the seriousness that it should. Like the idea that Static's dad's going to lose his job and this like really important place in the community is going to be closed down. Like it feels like that should be a bigger deal in the episode, and it's just not. Which, hey, it's an action show. You got to have, fights with big robots are probably going to score better with your average rank and file viewer than, Virgil's sad dad and is losing his job. But yeah,
Right.
that was kind of what I thought about looking at it now. It's like, well, maybe you could have focused a little bit more on the human drama and a little less on the zaps and the fisticuffs. But yeah, overall, it's not awful. It's the Specs and Trapper characters are kind of, like I said, these weird little foils that Virgil has in the back where it's like, oh yeah, these guys suck every time they show up, in a way like you really enjoy seeing them get their comeuppance, because even though they're these brilliant guys who can just invent anything, they're also really dumb. So they're kind of a fun duo to pit against Static. So there's pluses to it, but not a home run by any means either.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's kind of reflected in our middle of the road scores there for plot. All right, Liam, shall we move on to our second category of the day, which is going to be animation and visuals. As you mentioned at the top, we had not one, but two animation studios responsible for this one, and I think that may lend to some of the story we're about to tell, perhaps if you had the same thoughts that I do, which I generally get the feeling that you may. We had Slightly Offbeat Productions, who their other episodes include Grounded, Bent Out of Shape, Trouble Squared, and Frozen Out. Pretty sure we've done all those. And those are early season. I guess some of those were season 2, right? And then we had they also worked with the same company on those same episodes. I think the only other episode that Top Draw did on their own or with another animation studio would have been Sunspots. So, yeah, right off the bat, you can tell there are a lot of odd up close shots of our characters, and they look very strange. Shots from one shot to the next, characters and character models are very different. The first one that I noticed was when they are doing the field trip, and there's the leader of the field trip, who I think is also maybe the secretary to Mr. Alva. She kind of resembles Poison Ivy in the first bit, and then they change, and her hair is almost completely different. It looks like the show completely changed. There are some shots where the animation and the models have these really giant, thick lines to them, sort of more akin to what you would see in more modern animation, with the thicker black lines that are kind of resemble almost a comic book. Whereas there are other shots where the characters are that, like, as you've put it, very Disney-fied, sort of cartoon, over the top, doe-eyed, very expressive eyebrows, and over the top facial animation. There's problems with scaling in several of the scenes, including the robot scene. There was some clear scaling issues with when the army goes in, and all of a sudden the crates they're like smaller than this little box that's on the on the ground in the foreground. There were some issues with, as I already stated, the character models from one scene to the next. Static looks completely off. Eyes going in weird directions. A lot of like weird up close shots where characters just sort of fade in. There's a lot of, I think if I had to wager, I would say there was probably a lot of this episode that was just so bad that they had to cut it, because there's a lot of fading done between scenes, but it's the same scene. Like, it's a cut, but it's faded from one thing to the other, and that's never a good look. Like, it's probably done because there was so much maybe that they had to cut out that didn't match, or it just looked bad, or or maybe it was a decision by the animation studio that they just decided to do. I don't know, but the fades from scene to scene, not even from scene to scene, from cut to cut. The scene where Static breaks into the school at the end, and he powers up. He looks super cool in this like moment where he has to power up and shoots down all of the cameras, and then it lasts for like a nanosecond, and then we get this weird fade to where he's like flying in front of the cameras. And that whole final scene, there's like a lot of jump cuts that are done. It's not good. It's a mess. I'd say is probably the best way to describe it from my point of view.
Yeah, it's brutal, and yeah, to your point, it's not bad in the same way. Like it's bad in different ways as the episode goes on. Scaling was definitely the one thing I thought there was really consistent problems with. From little things like there's part where they break off a little piece of the stone Edwin Alva Jr. his hair to test the machine on, and it slowly reverts the stone piece back into his hair follicle, and like the size and shape and everything of how much hair it's supposed to be changes drastically from shot to shot. When like they're trying to do this thing where the strand of hair is kind of in the foreground, and then you see the scientist walk up and pick it up, and like how close or not close he is seems to vary very like a lot between like just scaling. Everything looks weird. The scene in the warehouse with the robot you already mentioned, when the security team with their little speed stick lasers breaks in, and like how big they are compared to the boxes that are in the warehouse keeps changing.
Yep.
How big the robot is keeps changing. Like there's a lot of issues with that really throughout the whole episode. How big like the things in the room are. And I mean the backgrounds are static, so you don't pun intended, like they're not, you can't blame that on the background people. It's only the things that are being used by the animators in the foregrounds of the scenes that keep changing like that. So it's like it seems pretty fully on the two animators that we had working on this. Again, I don't know which scenes to attribute to which. Wildly inconsistent character models as well. Also, I guess, and this might be because this is the HD-ified 1080p version that they've put on HBO Max. So I don't know if the original show looked like this. Richie looks sickly throughout the whole episode. Like, and this is not an issue on the animation team, obviously, because they're not doing the color on the show as well. But like whoever the color team is, and I don't know if it always looked like this or if this is some weird like error on when they did like the HD upres. But Richie has this really weird like pale grayish tone. Like it reminds me of the episode where the Brain Puppets episode where he gets turned into a zombie. Like he has almost that like grayish skin tone throughout the whole episode. And at first I'm like, well, is it supposed to be because it's nighttime in some of the scenes? But he kind of has it the whole time, even like when he's in a house that's well lit or whatever. So I don't know what happened to Richie. I guess he was anemic this week. He hadn't seen the sun in a while. I don't know, but I think he had some kind of condition.
Yeah, not great. Many bad things, as we've both pointed out. I guess I dislike just poo-pooing everything if we can help it. So there were, as I mentioned, the scene where Static powers up and knocks out all the security cameras. I liked that bit there. I thought that was the best looking thing in the entire episode. I thought that the robot design, scaling issues aside, was kind of cool. I don't know. It kind of looked like one of the robots from RoboCop, but also maybe the Lost in Space robot also too. I don't know where the inspiration for that robot may have come from. If you know, let us know. Yeah, so I think I got some what was that old Nintendo game, Metroid, I think it was called. I got some Metroid vibes from like the helmet that Spectrum is wearing. Interesting design that he has a mask that covers his full face and the other guy's face is wide open. I know they went with gauntlets versus a mask, but why not just make it uniform? I guess because you had to tell the two apart.
Yeah. Well, he also has the one guy also has the ponytail sticking out. So
yeah, I don't know. I kind of wanted a little more uniformity there, but I liked that they fought on a giant baseball field. I thought that was kind of cool. The first fight takes place, although the backgrounds are wildly inconsistent because nothing looks the same. It just again, scaling was probably an issue there, but also just the inconsistency of like what the different angles of the ballpark would look like. But a very cool setting. At least I enjoyed that. Anytime you can do battle in a sports arena of some kind, I enjoy that. But I think that's probably where my praise for this episode drops. So yeah, looking at everything, putting it all together, looking at all of the very bad transitions. I didn't even mention there's a couple of points where characters just seem to like float into frame.
I was gonna say there's a shot of, I think it's when they capture Static and Specs goes to get Alva and it cuts them like in a hallway and it's like the background is going, it's like they're on one of those walkways at the airport,
right?
Like where they're like, because they're walking very slowly but the backgrounds are like zooming behind them, like they're running, but they're like kind of just bobbing up and down at a very slow speed, so they didn't really match like the moving background to how they walked in a lot of those scenes, I felt.
Yeah, the sequence where Static escapes after he's been captured by them, also, there were so many bad cuts in that, like, he runs into a hallway and he's supposed to run into a pair of guards, but he like turns the corner and then there's a cut and then a different angle from the same point of view, essentially, in the same hallway of the guards standing there, and then a cut back to him and then a fade. It's messy. On solely on the back of that power up and the robot design, I ended up giving animation and visuals a 1 out of 10. What about you?
Well, yeah, I was a little nicer. I went 2 out of 10. Yeah, I like the idea. Like, I can imagine trying to put my mind into like 10-year-old Liam. These Specs and Trapper, like what they can do is neat as far as like, okay, he's got like a laser blaster that comes out of his face that, does all these, really only does one unique thing, which is the ice ray, and then like 3 different colored lasers that are just lasers. But like, I like that, and I like the gauntlets. I can see like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like the red wave that slows everything down, the bit where the bomb's about to go off and he puts the gauntlet on it to slow down the clock is kind of interesting. And like when you kind of see the bomb actually start to go off in slow motion and kind of the pieces of it break apart, it's like, okay, they tried some interesting things. I wish those, and it's whatever they are. The idea is they're kind of like throwing these suits together, so it's fine. But I wish the super suits were a little more interesting. Like, just kind of like they're in black jumpsuits with like little silver armor pieces. It's just not that interesting of a look, if I'm honest. But yeah, overall, we've seen worse, but not a lot. when it comes to visuals.
Not much. That's right. So let's move on, get away from this hellscape, shall we? And talk about music instead, shall we, for our next category? And of course, Richard Wolf responsible for the music for this week's episode. Liam, I was disappointed. There were not a lot of strong rap songs for this episode. Or weak rap songs either. There was like, what did we call it? Like, it's kind of like Rage Against the Machine. It's like a scream. It's like a screaming person. I don't know. I couldn't even make out the lyrics, so we can't even do Cal's rhyme time this week. There's like that sequence. There's like one sequence where Richie and Static are sitting at a table getting food, and the music comes in. It's just like an R&B song, and the lyrics sounded like "I Want to Shine, Gonna Make It to the Top of the World, Gonna Shine," something like that. Where the lyrics, it was okay. There was a noticeable like electronic piece later on when they're doing battle in the I think when they're at the school.
I think if they use it twice, they use it in that when Static breaks out when they have him locked up at Alva, and then they bring it back for the final fight again. It's very video gamey music. It actually kind of sounds like they don't do the riff, but it's kind of the Static version of the Batman theme, the Danny Elfman Batman theme. It just doesn't do the part. Like it's just, but it has that it's like this very like techno dancey bit. It feels, like I said, it felt very video game music to me.
Yeah, that's a fine piece. It's it's weird that it's the same seasons that we're used to and the same episodes that we're used to hearing this very overt, unique, lyric-filled music. And then when it's gone, you pay Paradise and put up a parking lot, you don't know what you got till it's gone. I kind of missed some of the, this is growth for this character, Liam. I might actually admitting that I missed the over-the-top goofy lyrics. Am I okay? Should I check my own temperature? What's going on here? Yeah. Middle of the road, 5 out of 10 for music. Nothing offensive, but could have used a little bit of something to make me laugh in the midst of this visual travesty.
Fair enough. I did really like that like I said, that very video gamey fight music that they use a few times. There's also is like we'd have to go back and check if it's in the other episodes. There is kind of like an Edwin Alva. It's more of like a refrain than a theme, but it's like this real like heavy like synthesizer sound, and then an electric guitar like strums one note really dramatically whenever he walks into a room. I was like, okay, they gave Edwin Alva a little bit of a theme here. That's pretty neat. And then I did like at the end when they transitioned from that sort of techno video gamey music. As Static is he grabs Edwin Jr. and flies him out of the building, and Specs and Trapper are kind of freaking out, and they're looking at each other, go, oh my, I have to keep the gauntlet on, and then the Static theme kind of kicks in as he flies Edwin out, flies back in, the bomb goes off, and they go flying through the wall, and he grabs them and takes them to justice as well. They kind of bring in the Static Shock theme there, which I enjoyed quite a bit. So some pluses there. I think music one of the rare highlights of this episode to me.
Here we are. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which is going to be our voice actors and actresses. And as I mentioned at some point during our initial part of the episode, there are a couple of very memorable, notable returning guests here for our two lead bad guys, and then of course a lot of the cast regulars, a couple of returning guests as well. Let's go ahead and discuss this week's voice cast.
That is right. Really, just a lot of names. We do have briefly Maria Canales Barrera. She's both the news reporter Shelley Sandoval and the administrative assistant / tour guide at Alva Industries. We have Michelle Morgan as Sharon briefly, and Kevin Michael Richardson as Robert Hawkins. Of course, very briefly, we have Crystal Scales as Daisy as well. But we'll get to our villains here. Kicking it off with our villain turned just regular slimy corporate guy, I guess. Kerrigan Mahan returning as Edwin Alva here. I had kind of forgotten and then immediately remembered. It's like, oh, he's Michael Douglas. That's what he's doing.
That's right.
He's greed is good. Like that's his whole thing here. He gets to do a little bit more in this episode, like we said, because he's not necessarily the mustache twirling bad guy this time. He's actually, not really sympathetic, I would say, because he's still tried to kill Static like 5 times, but he is in this episode. He never sends Specs and Trapper after him, and does try to eventually, even if his arm is kind of twisted by Static and having no other choice after he's led into the trap with the robot, he does ultimately kind of do the right thing and asks Static for help and then makes the donation. So he gets a little bit more to do besides just be the typical shadowy corporate bad guy bankrolling the other bad guys, I guess.
Yeah, I would say it's a weird semi-redemption arc for the guy that they set up for a very long time. Like, I don't know. I think that's intriguing. Like, the best villains oftentimes have some bits to them that you have to be able to identify with. If they're completely unrelatable, then which is fine. I guess there's 2 types of villains. There's the ones that are completely unrelatable, that are homicidal maniacs, and they're the other ones that are somewhat relatable, or there's a portion of their gripe or whatever that is relatable. I don't think that that's necessarily what they went with here, but the fact that he's a human being and has care for his son that he clearly maybe somewhat feels guilty about, or has some sort of desire. Maybe it's not all innocent desire, but desire to revive him. It's interesting to see a softer side of Alva, and one that's not just hell-bent on being 100% evil for the entire episode.
Yeah, I think it gives him a little bit more of it makes him a little bit more 3-dimensional as a character. For sure. Elsewhere, our 2 villains, we have Michael Rosenbaum, who you may have heard of, playing Mr. Trapper / Speed Trap, and also the security guard, which is maybe my favorite scene in the whole episode if we didn't talk about it, where Static does the thing to disable the cameras, and there's a security guard that's asleep at the monitors, and the other guard walks up, who I believe is voiced by Phil Lamar, and it's like, Irv, wake up. And then by the time he wakes up, the security cameras are back on, and he just goes, yes, they're called security monitors. Thank you. And it's just, rookies under his breath. I enjoyed that. That's a good little gag in the midst of this episode. But
that was funny.
As always, Michael Rosenbaum, fine, doing the incidental voices, as well as Mr. Trapper and his partner in crime, returning for this episode, Mr. Patton Oswalt of A Million Things fame, Blade Trinity most memorably, I'm sure. It's very obviously Patton Oswalt and Michael Rosenbaum, isn't it? Like, it's not. I don't think they're doing anything wrong, but it's just very obviously those 2 guys. Like,
it is. I think they have this weird, goofy buddy cop. Not buddy cop, but buddy villain. Like I said, It reminds me of those old Looney Tunes cartoons with the 2 groundhogs or whatever they are, hedgehogs, whatever they are.
Chipmunks?
Chipmunks, is that what they are? Whatever they are. Yeah. Where they just have this like weird offbeat chemistry. They go together, they refer to each other by their last names. They spend most of their time just like, there isn't like a hint of professional jealousy at all. They're just like 2 dudes that are evil and mean and want the approval of this science guy, and they can't get it, so they take it out on everybody else. So I kind of like it. There's not even like a hint of redeemable kindness. This is the other side of the villain coin, I guess. There's not even like a hint of redeemable goodness in either of these 2 guys. They're just straight up evil and unapologetic about it. And the voice performances, as you mentioned, while very obviously Patton Oswalt and Michael Rosenbaum, it really wasn't I think maybe it's because of how they're playing these characters. It wasn't as, I mean, of course I know who's
Right.
playing them, but it wasn't so distracting that I couldn't appreciate these characters or kept thinking that this was those two actors.
Yeah, I think they bounced off each other really well. Because yeah, they do have this weird energy, like where you're just like, oh, these guys are just so freaking weird and annoying, but not in a way that makes you want to turn the show off, in a way that makes you want to, see them get their comeuppance at the end of the episode. By the way, I think I've been calling him Spectrum this whole episode. It was Spectral was his supervillain name.
Spectral? I had Spectrum in
Spectral.
my notes too. I must not.
Or at least that's what.
No,
it
you're
says.
right. Spectral. You're right. You're right.
At least according to the DCAU wiki. I have not gone back and looked at the tape.
Well, we both called him Spectrum the entire episode, and his name was Spectral. So, correction. If you already tweeted at us to tell us that we were calling him the wrong name, thank you for catching us earlier.
That's fine. Yes, but yes, with them, and then of course we have our heroic leads. We have Jason Marsden briefly as Richie. He doesn't get much to do in this one. He has a couple little conversations with Virgil, a little bit of exposition to remind us of who Specs and Trapper are when they show up. And then he does have that one scene where he has to kind of cover for Virgil when he's kidnapped, and Sharon's calling him to find out where he is. But other than that, it's our only other actor to talk about is, of course, the great Phil Lamar. We spend so much time with our villains and with Edwin Alva in this episode. It's kind of like I said, I wish we could have gotten more of like Virgil exploring his relationship with his dad and the community center and all that stuff. Like, I think that would have been really interesting to lean into that, just because we've really enjoyed those episodes when they've come up, few and far between as they are, where they explore whether it's Virgil's relationship with his mother or with his dad or his sister. So it would have been kind of nice to get to see a little bit more emotional acting, but that's not what the script ended up calling for. So yeah, it's pretty standard static fare, I would say, for Mr. Lamar. A good solid outing.
Yeah, there were a couple of lines that sounded a little bit off, but yeah, I mean, everybody is allowed to have an off day, especially when you're one of the DCAU goats and all of best voice actors of all time. So maybe wasn't my favorite performance in certain spots, but everybody strikes out now and then.
Fair enough, yeah. So I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for my voice acting score. I think, like I said, Mr. Oswalt and Rosenbaum are pretty fun as this weird little evil nerd duo, but nothing really to write home about otherwise from the rest of our cast.
Yep, and I settled on a 5 out of 10, pretty much for the same reason. All right, Liam, let us total our scores up as we come to the end of this week's episode. And totaling up my score, I end up with been a while since I've heard a number in the teens, a 16 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher, frankly, too high, it feels like. But no, I don't, other than the visuals, which are unfortunately a pretty important part of the episode. I think this episode is pretty all right, but I ended up with a flat even 20 out of 40. So yeah, rewatchability, these characters all come back. So you could probably argue, because I believe when Spectral and Speed Trap reappear, they do have their weapons again. So this is the origin story of them going from just being evil. I think they had like mech suits or something in the first episode. So this is continuing some threads from previous episodes, and they'll be picked up on again in later episodes, with Edwin Alva's sort of continued quest to cure his son popping up a few more times throughout the series. So unfortunately, I think I got to give this like the most reluctant one thumb up for rewatchability I can muster here, because I do think there's elements for static where this matters, but as far as the overarching DCAU, obviously not. But yeah, this is probably this has some foundation that will be built upon from here, unfortunately.
Just cover your eyes if you're going to watch it. Watch it while you're scrolling on your phone, and you can listen. Can listen to exactly what's going on. That would be my condition if we're going to give it a one thumb up, which I don't disagree with. I think there are some important things here. It moves the thread along with Alva, which we really haven't had much movement recently in the episodes that we've reviewed. So obviously we don't review them in order, but we've kind of bounced around a lot. But they kind of do move away from that Alva storyline until here. So you're picking up on this thread. As you mentioned, it's continued on later episodes in the series. So if you skipped it, maybe not the worst thing. But as we mentioned, there are maybe solely for Michael Rosenbaum and Mr. Patton's performances, we would recommend checking this out, as well as the other things. So yeah, I'll agree with you. One thumb up. All right, Liam, let's begin to wrap things up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode. Don't forget, if you like the episode, if you like the pod, we would love your support for the podcast. You can do that several different ways. You can do so by supporting us on social media at DCAU Review. Join in the conversation on Twitter/X or Instagram at DCAU Review on both of those. We're also on Threads at DCAU Review. All of our posts, I think, are going to Threads now because I think we properly synced it so that it's supposed to do that. So we do post there as often as we do on Instagram, but we just don't. I haven't interacted with anybody on there as of yet. So Liam does every now and then. So check that out. If that's your main way to discuss things with people, by all means, we'll get back to you at some point if you interact with us on Threads. But Twitter X or Instagram is the way to go. You can also support us by checking out the show notes on the podcast. If you listen to us, regardless of where you listen to us, there's a link there to support the podcasts and become a monthly supporter. We have several people that support us with their hard-earned dollars. We appreciate our supporters and those that continue to give to us. It makes our lives a little bit easier on the late Friday nights when we're editing the pod and struggling to stay awake. So thank you for our supporters that do that. And you can also check out the link to our store, which is also in the show notes as well. Liam, folks can also subscribe to us on their favorite podcast app, which of course includes both Spotify and Apple Podcasts and a lot of the other ancillary podcast aggregators as well. If you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, feel free to give us a 5-star review on that. That helps us out a lot. It's a good way to support us. If you listen to us on Apple Podcasts and you leave a 5-star review there with a little bit of a blurb, we'll read it on the air. And if you live within the continental United States, we'll send you a thank you gift just for taking the time to do that. So thank you to those that have already done that. And if you want to be the next recipient of a little gift, take the time now and go do it. Liam, let's discuss what we're going to be reviewing next week on the pod as we continue with more Static here in the month of July.
That is right, Cal, and we are visiting next week an episode that I think is one of the ones that is very often remembered as a pretty fun one from the later part of this show's run. An episode where Static meets up with a hero from yesteryear, though not Batman or Superman this time. This time he's teaming up with the sort of 70s blaxploitation parody character, Soul Power, and as one of Soul Power's old enemies rises to menace Dakota, Static has to team up with a superhero of a different generation, and there's certainly a style splash that awaits us when we watch that episode next week.
Looking forward to that, Liam. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.